Great. Well, first, thank you, Anya, for inviting me to be a part of this symposium, and also thanks to the chairs for accepting this symposium for this conference today. Just a little bit of background on who I am, in case you don't know me. I was actually the lead test developer for reading literacy for the PISA 2018 cycle, which was the last time that the reading literacy domain was updated. And then I was also the overall project manager for PIAAC Cycle 2 and worked very closely with all of the expert groups for the cognitive domains of literacy, numeracy, and problem solving. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the connections between PISA and PIAAC, and then a little bit about the differences that we need to consider. And then, of course, Nate's going to go into sort of a deeper explanation of the similarities and differences of the frameworks and the item types. So I'm going to kind of start with the overview of all of this. So in my view, the reading literacy and the literacy assessments of PISA and PIAAC respectively are more similar now than they have ever been before. And that's really due to the updates that first happened in the PISA 2018 cycle when we updated the framework for reading literacy. I feel like that actually aligned reading literacy more with PIAAC's literacy domain, and PIAAC was a little bit ahead in terms of incorporating elements of digital literacy and multiple source, and it was really the updates to the Reading 2018 framework that really brought those two closer together. So in PISA 2018, that was the first time in the framework where it was really, the assessment was conceived as a digital assessment. Prior to that, the reading development had been for a paper and pencil assessment. So it allowed for us to do things like multiple sources, using hyperlinks, using website type stimuli, and really, I think, helped bring the concept of reading literacy into a very modern domain. Now, mathematics, literacy, and numeracy have similarities, but as I understand it, there are actually kind of maybe bigger differences existing now between, say, mathematics literacy of 2022 and numeracy. And I'm not going to go into numeracy. I'm going to really focus on literacy and reading today because that's where my expertise is. So while they are more similar now than they've been before, there are really significant operational differences between the PISA and PIAAC survey that we really need to carefully consider when we're thinking about making direct comparisons between the data of these two studies. And above all, we also have to remember there are different scales. So you simply can't compare them. It's really not an easy task. And we're very lucky today to be joined by two teams who are grappling with these issues now, the team from Denmark and the team from Singapore, who are going to talk about how they've been kind of dealing with the fact that there's these two different scales. So in terms of the similarities, there are framework similarities, and let me step back a second. We can think of things at like a higher level theoretical aspect. We can think about how the theory has been operationalized in the assessment, and then we can think about the sort of operational elements that are about the data collection and the population. So there's these different elements we kind of really need to consider when we're thinking about similarities and differences. The good thing is that from a theoretical framework standpoint, I think there's a lot of similarities. Nate's going to go into the detail on that in the next presentation. And then how it's operationalized as an assessment, there are some item types that are very familiar, they're very similar, but as Nate's going to show you, there's also some that are very different. But, so we do start with quite a few similarities. Now I'm going to talk about one of like the kind of lower level aspects of this, and that's the layout and the organization. I view this as important because from a sort of just basic information processing standpoint, there's a tremendous amount of overlap in how students and how adults are operating the assessment as they're moving through. So I'm showing you two screens here. These are from released items that you can see on the OECD's website. The one on the left is from PISA, and the one on the right is from PIAAC. So I'm going to just go through a few very simple things. First of all, the navigation is the same, so you go back and forth, and you can access help using the same layout here. The sort of item structure, or indicating where you are in the assessment, appears in the same place. The items appear in the same place. we're looking at different item types, but the point here is like the sort of just layout and how it's organized. The stimuli appear on the same place on the screen. And I want to draw your attention to this tab. So we developed the use of tabs to allow us to have multiple sources of information. You're only seeing one source of information in this context. This is one of the ways that we implemented multiple sources, where you can, when there are multiple sources, access them through these different tabs. I'm also now showing you one of our sort of richer website types of stimuli and units. This is from the Galapagos unit. That's a released item. And what you can see here is that this doesn't have that sort of same tabular structure, but it has the sort of kind of tabs that we envision regularly on a website. So PISA and PIAAC both have this kind of format. So again, this is kind of maybe the more boring element of similarities, but I did want to show you that, like, in terms of layout and organization, you can't ask for a better comparison. But let's start talking about some of the differences, because these are the things that analysts, and when you're conceptualizing studies, you really need to think carefully about how these differences may be getting into your results, and intentionally or not intentionally. So first of all, the populations are quite different. In PISA, of course, we have students. They're aged 15 years to 3 months to 16 years to 2 months. So it doesn't matter what grade they're in. If they are in that age band, they can sit the assessment. They could be selected for the assessment. In PIAAC, of course, we have adults aged 16 to 65 that are living in households and not institutions. That's just an important part. So we're looking for dwelling units where those individuals are living. So we have a broad range of people in PIAAC, and we have a quite narrow range of people in PISA. Anya already highlighted some ways that you can constrain the samples of PIAAC to be more similar to PISA, and when doing so, you might tend to find more similar results. I think another thing that we really need to consider is the assessment settings. So in PISA, they're taking the assessment in school, in a group setting with a proctor. And that's important because you can have one proctor with the same group of students, maybe even throughout the day, there's different groups of students. You could have that same proctor also going to another school. And I'm trying to point out here that that same proctor is likely going to have a similar methodological, approach to how they support the students in the group testing situation. And there's, I think, more likelihood for common operations across one proctor and multiple students. Now in PIAAC, we assess them in homes or public places, and it's one-on-one with an interviewer. So what's different about that is that one interviewer can only assess one person at a time. So it's a slower, more one-by-one sort of process. There could be interviewer differences. We try really, really hard to have the same, our national teams do an amazing job of instructing their interviewers to deliver the assessment in the same manner, but of course there are slight individual differences. But one of the things that I think is really important about this difference here is that in the course of a one-on-one interview, there's a rapport building that happens that can be really significant in terms of keeping motivation throughout the testing session. Whereas with a proctor group setting, you're not getting that same individualized kind of rapport. The other thing that we need to consider is the order. In PISA, the cognitive assessment comes first. I believe it's a 2-hour cognitive assessment followed by about a 30-minute background questionnaire. And in PIAAC, the order is reversed. We have first about a 45-minute background questionnaire followed by a 1-hour cognitive assessment. I don't know how to quantify the potential fatigue or motivational difference that exists between doing the assessment first versus doing the background questionnaire first, but I think it's something we really need to consider. So one of the questions I'm always thinking is, well, how do all those similarities and differences really balance out? And I feel like this could be really a tricky or perhaps impossible thing to estimate or really determine the direction of the impact. And this is just to kind of get people thinking and just to really educate and make people aware that these differences shouldn't be ignored. That's really the goal of my talk here today. But to think about motivational or performance differences, if we see differences between the two surveys, Does it have to do with the order and possible differential fatigue effects on the assessment? Could it be the nature of the administration, group versus individual? I also want us to think about the test taker's context. Students are accustomed to taking tests. They may not like it, but they are accustomed to taking tests as a normal part of their daily school life. But for adults, when is the last time someone showed up to your house and gave you a literacy or numeracy or problem-solving assessment? I mean, hopefully no one in the room had this happen because you probably should have been excluded from the PIAAC sample. But this is just to say that this is not a normal course of our daily lives as adults. We also are, workers, parents, caretakers, all kinds of things. We have very busy, stressful lives, and it's sometimes really hard to fit in a 2-hour interview and assessment, and I feel like adults today even more so are feeling all these pressures. So, it's something very unique to do this kind of experience as an adult. So my conclusions are pretty simple. Analysts really need to approach these PISA-PIAAC comparisons, I think, with caution. I don't think we should avoid them, but we should just really think carefully about how we approach them. And ideally, future formal linking studies should be happening to really fully understand the true connections between PISA-PIAAC. That's a request for the OECD and the governing boards of these important surveys. It would be great to see a common scale or some kind of conversion that would make all of this work easier. And as I mentioned already, we're really fortunate to have the following talks. Nate's going to talk more deeply about framework commonalities and differences, as well as item types, and talk about the implications of that. And then, as I mentioned, we have colleagues from Denmark and from Singapore to talk about their longitudinal studies following 2009 PISA participants into PIAAC. And of course, longitudinal studies are one of our strongest methodologies that we can use to look at change and look at how these things might be similar. So I personally am looking very forward to hearing from these two teams about what they've been doing. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you.